Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. And it's in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Kayang magiging telas ng sinananan, alam ng puso, sa dikit mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, kuya ka ng magiting, sa manlulupin, di ka masisipin, sa nagatak tutok sa simoy at sa langit ang panggaw, ay hinatang tulang awit sa pagkayang minamahal. Ang isang lang matawad mo'y tagumpay na nagtitindig, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pang ay di magtitindig. Lumang ang araw ng walaking pagsingkap, buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang hindi kaya ng kangay mga akin, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo. Sing and bless all your children, of devotion and faith. See you in us and many festivals of vision and of faith. Voices echoing unison, all our hearts beat as one, singing together to say, so ever grateful for all you have done. Let to thee our alma mater, hail, hail, be forevermore. We may cross the oceans and the hills while we travel, a treasure from shore to shore. See you, light of our nation, sail on thy voyage from its moon. You are our dedication, dedication to our world. And to thee, our alma mater, hail, hail, be forevermore. We may cross the oceans and the hills while we travel, the treasure from shore to shore. See you, pride of our nation, sail on thy voyage from its moon. You are our dedication, dedication.
to our senior high school principal, Dr. Amor QD Torres, our vice principal, Mrs. Maria Conchita P. Bas, teachers, students, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to another webinar session in celebration of English Month 2021. By the way, I'm Frank Bernie Argila, and I will be your host this afternoon. I believe that you learned significant lessons in our webinar yesterday, and this afternoon, you will definitely learn more. But before we go further, I would like to remind everyone, after the session, you will be asked to answer or respond to the exit quiz. All questions for that quiz will be from the slide or presentation of the resource speaker. Only those who can get a score of 3 and above will be included in the attendance. So you should pay attention, listen well to the discussion of the resource speaker for you to be able to answer the questions later. For this afternoon's webinar, we are going to talk about creative writing, appreciation of fiction and nonfiction stories. This is designed to help you appreciate the essence of literature in the 21st century. So are you excited? Are you ready to listen to our resource speaker? All right, so can I see some reactions from our viewers? Kindly send a thumbs up or yes in the comment section if you are ready and excited. All right. Kindly type yes or send a thumbs up if you are ready and excited to listen to our resource speaker this afternoon. All right, so what I can see in the comment section are the names and sections of the students. All right, so we have here, all right. So I can feel the energy and the enthusiasm of students to listen. All right, so at this point, let us not further prolong the agony. So without further ado, let me introduce to you the guest speaker for this afternoon. Our guest speaker this afternoon was born and raised in Cagayan de Oro City. He authored his first poetry collection in Binisaya, Basa Basa. He finished his Master's of Arts in Literature at Xavier University in 2019. His works have appeared in Bisaya Magazine, Sunstar Cebu and Davao, Sunstar Super Balita, Brown Child, The Best of Faigal Poetry and Fiction from 1984 to 2012, The Best of Dagmay 2, Kinaadman Journal, Mindanao Harvest 4, and Tinubdan, New Voices from Northern Mindanao. His works have also been published online such as Kabisdak, Cebuano Literary Lighthouse, Dagmay Literary Journal, Karayan Journal, TLDTD.org, and the Lock Raven Review. He was also one of the awardees in the Lambago Awards in 2016 and 2018 for his outstanding contribution for the flourishing of arts and culture in Cagayan de Oro City. He has been a fellow of several writers' workshops, including the 50th National Writers' Workshop. He is currently teaching literature and humanities in college and affiliated with Nagmak or Nagkahiusang Magsusulat sa Cagayan de Oro. It is an honor and privilege to introduce to you Sir Mark Anthony Dapusala. Sir?
Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon as well to the viewers. So, for the meantime, I am currently having some technical issues with regarding the with my lamp here. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to retain the avatar here for the meantime, and then later on, I'm just going to tweak later if I can, if the lamp will activate for the for today. So let me just I prepared a presentation with regards to the topic or the discussion that was assigned to me. So I'll be talking more about fiction and creative nonfiction, but to be specific, I'll be more focusing on the notion of craft. Okay. So hopefully my presentation is already viewed on screen. Okay. So now we're talking about fundamentals of the craft. Now, since we are not talking about, focusing more on the reading part of the craft. That's why I specifically arrange this discussion to be focusing more on reading, or to read as a writer. And if I'm going to cite or quote a, 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 a renowned fictionist in this country, it would be from Butch Dalisay, who said that I became a writer, but first I became a reader. Okay, so when you read as a writer, it you have to consider the following points, right? So most of the time, our culminating activities in creative writing classes is of course to write, but reading is also important, bec- because if we're going to talk about if we're going to talk about writing, we can't write properly if you don't read, in the same way that you can speak properly if you don't know how to listen. So chances are what you write will give your reader hints at the kind of reader you are. Okay? So reading and writing, they always go hand in hand. Now, you've probably heard of or learned different elements of different literary forms of literature, from elements of fiction, elements of poetry, elements of what the essay, particularly the creative nonfiction. But when writers read, when writers read, there are following aspects, recurring aspects that we or that we consider, and these are elements of the craft. These are elements that emerge, or that are present in all genres of literature. Okay, so we have imagery, voice, and form. So let's start with imagery. Now, it's not coincidental that when we think of creative writing is always imaginative writing. And if we consider the word imagination, it is the ability to form concepts and images which are not physically present, yet exist within the mind and appeals to the senses. And if we're going to consider the word images, we of course we the first thing that we'll notice is our pictures. But it's not coincidental where imagination and image all boils down to the Latin term imagos, which is of course picture. So just like all arts, creative writing makes use of a medium, and that medium is language. However, that language is used in such a way that it brings forward, or it foregrounds the images within the language. So writers, you makes use of language in general, right? From journalists, even our fellow academics. So essentially, we humans are writers. But poets, in particular, fictionists and essayists, more often than not, pay special attention to these parts of speech. We have nouns, particularly concrete nouns, and verbs, particularly more on action verbs to create imagery. So, an image is a word or series of words that appeals to one or more of the five senses. So, i- so if you can recall, we have five senses. We have sight, we have hearing, we have taste, we have touch, we have smell. What else? What else did I miss? So all of these. So the concept of image, especially in relation to writing, pertains to words that appeals to these senses, and and in particular, we tend to look at nouns and verbs more because when you think of a concrete noun such as a chair, the first thing that comes out of your mind is chair, right? Even the sense of touch, even the sense of smell, no? And perhaps your teachers may have already mentioned this, especially your teachers in creative writing classes, regarding other parts of speech, because normally in when we are taught on writing in general, we often include adjectives and adverbs, especially when we do something that is descriptive. But when we are doing creative writing, the, these adjectives and adverbs are not in the priority list. So, as Mark Twain said, when you catch an adjective, kill it. No, I don't mean utterly, but kill most of them. Or from the famous horror fictionist Stephen King, he says that the road to hell is paved with adverbs. So so make sure when you write, you have to make sure that you at least avoid or minimize the use of adjectives and adverbs. Okay? Prioritize your nouns and verbs. And as Janet Barroway mentioned, writing as an art begins when we surrender ourselves to the world of images. Now, here is a passage that lacks imagery. So, the passage is still descriptive. It's still descriptive, but it doesn't appeal to the senses. So allow me to read. Debbie was a very stubborn and completely independent person and was always doing things her way despite her parents' efforts to get her to conform. Her mother was an executive in a dress manufacturing company and was able to afford her family all the luxuries and comforts of life. But Debbie was completely indifferent to her family's affluence. Okay? So when you when you read the passage, of course you can understand that Debbie is stubborn and complete. But you will notice if you will notice that passage only tells you about Debbie, but it doesn't gives us, or we can't imagine Debbie as a character. So here's a passage, the same thought, but this time it contains imagery. So allow me to read. That afternoon, Debbie Lopez wore a spaghetti strap for the fundraising event, an event filled with her mother's business partners and closest clients. While her mother, Mrs. Divina Lopez, spent 2 hours of having her hair done, Debbie left her auburn-dyed hair unkempt. In town, Miss Lopez stood at the doorway, her hand covering her gaping mouth. You're going to the event looking like that? Unsay dat uy, Debbie replied, while donning her black leather jacket. While Mrs. Lopez had bought her daughter a necklace with gold filigree for a pendant, Debbie preferred her studded choker. So as you can see, we you will notice that this passage appeals to the senses. We can imagine Debbie Lopez wearing a spaghetti strap. Okay, we can imagine the spaghetti strap. We can imagine. We can even hear their voices through the dialogues. And notice how minimal are the use of adjectives and adverbs. Okay? So that is what we mean when we attempt to make images or image or apply imagery in our writing. So when you describe a scene, character, or feeling, you let the readers draw judgment. Your job as a writer is mostly to suggest through images. Show, not tell. Okay? So if we go back to the passage, us as readers will notice that Debbie Lopez is somewhat independent or doesn't conform to to her mother's norms, right? She's she's informal. She's pretty rugged. She doesn't keep her hair kempt. Okay, so we as readers determine or judge or we judge the character, but when we write, we show images in order for the readers to determine or to evaluate the kind of character our Debbie Lopez is. Okay, so imagery is present in scenes. So scenes consist of setting and characters. So you will notice that in this following passage by Manuel Argilia, in his short story how my brother Leon brought home a wife. So in the passage it states that the sun was in our eyes, for it was dipping into the bright sea. The sky was wide and deep and very blue above us, but along the sawtooth rim of the Katayagan Hills to the southwest flamed huge masses of clouds. Before us, the field swam in a golden haze through which floated big purple and red and yellow bubbles when I looked at the sinking sun. Labang's white coat, Labang here is a Carabao. So Labang's white coat, which I had washed and brushed that morning with coconut husk, glistened like beaten cotton under the lamplight, and his horns appeared tipped with fire. Okay, so notice how the narrator in this passage described the scene or the setting where the narrator here is located, or at least somewhere at least near or distant from the Katayaghan Hills. In character descriptions, another example by the same author can be observed in the short story Midsummer. Okay, so in the passage it states she had filled her jar and was rolling the kerchief around her hand into a flat coil which she placed on her head. Without glancing at him, where he had stopped some distance off, she sat down on her heels, gathering the fold of her skirt between her widespread knees. She tilted the brimful jar to remove part of the water, one hand on the rim, the other supporting the bottom. She began to raise it to her head. She knelt on one knee resting. For a moment, the jar onto her head, getting to her feet at the same time. But she staggered a little and water splashed down on her breast. The single bodice instantly clung to her bosom, molding the twin hillocks of her breast warmly brown through the wet cloth. Then, not once having raised her eyes, she passed by the young man, who stood mutely gazing beside his bull. Okay? So as you can see here, Argilia attempted to use concrete specific details in order to not only describe the character but also her actions. Every detail is foregrounded here in this passage. Now, imagery is also used to evoke mood and tone to create a kind of atmosphere within the text. Now, this is present in fiction and even in CNF, but this is also more prominent in poetry. So, Man from the Slums contemplates his church by Danton Remoto. So the lot is larger than the corner I live in. The baroque doors are thicker than my plywood walls. The candles burn before the frozen saints. Darkness gutters in my house. The chandeliers gleam like tears, and the windows glow with colors that will never warm my hut, where the windows have lids of sorrow. So here the tone and the mood here, we can get readers can get a glimpse as to the kind of persona that is evoked here in this particular poem. Here, the following images attempts to juxtapose two stark figures: the description of the church, the baroque doors, the candles, the chandeliers, and so forth, is compared to the personas plywood walls or plywood walls or the hut or the shanty where the persona or the man is living in order to create in order to emphasize the distinction between the distinction, or to emphasize the type of poverty that is experienced by the persona. Now, another thing about images is when images are utilized innovatively, it can add richness to writing and even add special effects or unique effects on readers, particularly in the use of figures of speech. And the effect is transformative since it twists our imagination from something that is literal to something else. So let us observe the comparison between this statement and rhetorical statement. So we have the following simple statement: batik kaugnaong. Okay, I'm going to use Cebuano text here. So here we have a simple statement: batik kaugnaong. The word batik is equivalent to the word ugly. Okay, so batik here is used as an adjective. Okay, now if you compare that statement to this rhetorical statement, you will notice nga lahi ang iyang epekto. Imong naong murag giligsan og pison. Okay? It's still the same thought, but this time it is using a simile. Okay? Now I'm using the Cebuano text here because I presume that most of the students here whose mother tongues are Binisaya. Okay? And I want you to I want to place emphasis over the fact that figures of speech are not simply scientific terms. They exist. Okay? That your next door neighbor probably speaks figuratively without even knowing that he speaks in metaphors and so forth. Okay? Now, the transformative effect of figures of speech can also become good alternatives, even if it's already an imagistic statement. So here, in the following sentence, we have another Cebuano sentence here. Niya nang higayon naghinalukay tang duha. You compare that to you compare that to a figurative statement now in the form of poetry. So gitilawan namo ang tambis og para kanimo lami. Lami para kanako. Para kanako lami. Lami para kanimo. Para kanako, para kanimo, lami para kanato. Okay? So So common figures of speech in literature are of the following. We have metaphors, simile, metonymy, synecdoche, hyperbole, personification, and oxymoron. However, although figures of speech works in ways that it gives magic to your writing, but that magic will be lost if you resort to tropes that have been overused, or in other words, balik-balik na. So, as much as possible, when you now go for rhetorical statement or figures of speech, you avoid cliches as much as possible. Okay. In fiction, the suggestiveness of metaphors becomes symbolic to the tone and action of the narrative. So this is an example of a flash fiction. So here we only have this is a fiction in just two paragraphs. So notice that I placed the underline and bolded some letters, some words here in order to emphasize how metaphors can become symbolic and can become symbolic towards the overall narrative. So it was a few days after the national election and we were about to board the plane. My husband tells me to wait with the children. He gets our boarding passes. We huddle with our bags. My eldest is 6 years old and wants to drink a Diet Coke, like Papa. We have run around these islands like headless chickens. We have snug and we have danced. In 3 weeks, the newspapers will give a list of the congressional winners. My husband's name is on it. We throw a party to celebrate. He gives this woman a diamond ring. I keep silent around him and his staff collect newspaper clippings. When my son asks for a drink, I give him nothing but water. Okay? So notice that the following images, Diet Coke and water, acts more than just its literal images. Okay? Because Diet Coke now becomes symbolic to how the eldest child of the narrator and the husband wants to become. Okay, so here the eldest wants to become like the father, drinking Diet Coke. But in the ending here, after the mother discovered the the husband had a woman or had an affair, this time this time the object of water becomes transformative. It's not just an object anymore. It becomes it becomes a symbolic action where the narrator's desire, of course, doesn't is pretty much veering towards the idea that I don't want my son to become like my husband. Okay, so here so here when we talk about the craft of images, instead of telling, we attempt to show our audience or our readers what the story is about instead of telling them. Okay? So remember, when it comes to images, show, not tell. So the next element is voice. And I believe that most of you here have voice. You already have it. However, it is a matter of refining it. So your voice is the is the summation of what you of the stock knowledge of words that you already have or you already learned, and of course the choices of words that you're going to use. Okay, so vocabulary plus diction. And how do you refine it? You refine it through conscious reading. If you don't know what this word means, get a dictionary. You read that passage in fiction in order to get the context. Okay, how those words are used. Okay, in order to get at least the diction of the text. And then after conscious reading, later you're going to test your voice through writing and revising, because the knowing is in the writing, matud pa ni Butch Dalisay. Now your voice is not the first step, okay? So that's just the no that's just the prelude. The skillful use of voice is manifested through persona, the use of persona, the narrator, characters, or the voices of characters. Now, the thing about persona here is when you eventually write, everyone, when you eventually write, you get the, especially when you write something that is that has the first person narrative, such as I, you have the you get the impression that you are talking about your life. However, what you are actually presenting is already the persona. The persona is the public manifestation of the self. It is the distorted or even partial version of that self. Okay? So persona is more are pretty they are prevalent in creative nonfiction and poetry. Now we have the narrator. The narrator's role is simply to tell the story. So depending on the type of narrator that you are going to use. So we'll cover that later on. Now, one of the perhaps the most difficult voice to demonstrate is the use of character's voice. Okay, it's difficult in a sense, especially when you write fiction. Especially when you write fiction, the most common mistakes from previous creative writing students, especially when they write fiction, is that when they write their when they write the dialogues of characters, the dialogues of characters sounds the same to the narrator or even to the author itself. So it was always we have to remember that the character is already a unique identity. It is it has its own speech tics, its own diction, it has its own diction and so forth. So the character is a unique identity, distant from the persona, the narrator, or even the author herself. So we have the following viewpoints. There are a number of viewpoints, but I will just be focusing on the most common viewpoints in the narrative. So we have the first person, most prevalent in poetry and in creative nonfiction because of its personal tone, because of the pronoun I. Then we have the third person, which is most common in fiction, especially in stories where narrators are not participants in the narrative. So the roles are strictly storytellers. Okay. Now, for every point of view, it has its own benefits and limitations. So, for instance, when you write fiction in a first-person narrative, you cannot you limit yourselves to the I character. You cannot go or you cannot describe what the other characters are thinking or even doing at the time that they were not present, of course. Okay, so you are just limited to that first to the first person point of view. Even in third person point of view, we have third person limited conscience, we have third person omniscience. All of these things have their own benefits and limitations. And the most important thing to know to remember when you are utilizing the narrative viewpoints is when you choose a narrative viewpoint, you have to be consistent with that viewpoint. So for instance, you told your story in third person, but all of a sudden it becomes it becomes a first person. Somewhere in the middle of your story, kaya nag-I lang kagalit. So medyo problematic na siya because the most important because the narrative viewpoint is the backbone of your story, and it calls for consistency in order to be believable. Okay, for the sake of verisimilitude. And then we go to the third aspect, form. So what I mean by form is to recognize the type of genres that you are going to write. So in fiction and creative nonfiction, imagery is utilized in describing scenes and characters. You will notice that when you read fiction, where there are instances where passages are more summarizing rather than portraying a scene, because in order to in order to make a smooth transition from one scene to another. Okay, now the voices in fiction and creative nonfiction may be varied, okay, depending on the narrator and the number of characters. In most creative nonfiction, the persona is the central speaker of the text. It's always the I, almost always the I. So the convenient distinction when you try to use images in fiction and in creative nonfiction is imagery in fiction is often the byproduct of imagination. Okay? While in CNF, the images used is a byproduct of memory. Okay? Because CNF, based on the term, is based from the genre, is it is writing truthfully from the actual truth, however portrayed or written in a way that resembles fiction. So in poetry in flash fiction, most often the persona is the central figure, especially in lyric poetry. Imagery is more abundant. The sound of words play a larger role in poetry. And of course, we also have to consider the number of words. Okay, so the form in poetry in flash fiction is more compact and dense. Now, ultimo, whether if it is CNF and whether if it is CNF, fiction, poetry, flash fiction, and so forth, almost all of those genres have conflict and tension. So it is arguable to say it is safe to say that the conflict and tension is the heart of literature. There is no story if your characters or persona have no conflict or tension. Now, if you will notice in our day to day, in our daily discourse, no, in our everyday lives, you have you ever noticed nga nung engaging ang chismis? Why do we engage ourselves in gossips? Because in most cases, gossips tend to have conflict and tension. We then ask what that person, what will happen, what happened to the person, and we we listen to the in details from one from in a cause and effect arrangement. And how do we create conflict and tension? We go back to our when we create character or when we utilize persona. Conflict is stemmed from the most pivotal aspect of character. And we always remember, especially in characters, that the character is someone who wants, na gina siya desire. Okay? Because it is that desire which is tested in the work of fiction, in CNF, and to a certain extent even in poetry. But in poetry it is more tension. Tension is more prevalent compared to conflict, because conflict arises when there is an act when there is a series of action, no. So tension is present in most literary genres. There is tension of relationships, action or task, scene and surroundings, uncertainty and the unknown. And conflict arises when the character's desire is pitted with a struggle or crisis. So when writers read, they learn how imagery, voice, and form are utilized as crafts, but it is also important to remember that the writer is also human. Writers live in a specific space, time, and culture. The text is written from a specific context, and the craft is never divorced from the world and society. So, to close my brief discussion, I'm just going to read a poem by Talasi Panood entitled Balak Batok sa Apolohista. Lima na katuig sukad sa paglubong sa imong agalon, nagkabaga ang uwat sa kahiladman sa iyang mga nabiktima. Walay pulos ang imong pahasubo, walay kalainan sa mga tingog sa konsentidor. Hapdos gyapon ang tunok sa kagahapon. Di maulian og pinulungan nga taman ra sa pahumot-humot. Tuod kangiob ang gadugdog niya ng lungon, nanimahog samot ang samang sa panumduman. Timani, kanang binaligtos sa imong bulatik, igo ra na ihagbas sa hait nga kamatuoran. Hunahunaa ang hinungdan nga nakalapida ang sungayan, gumikan sa mga nagyango-yango nga bungawon sa kagahapon ug buringog sa kaugmaon. Okay? So that ends my discussion for this afternoon.
All right. So thank you, sir, for your interesting and informative discussion. Indeed, writing, in particular creative writing, is a complex process. All right. So at this point, we will now have the open forum. So students, if you have questions regarding the presentation of Sir Mark Anthony, you may send them in the comment section. All right. So if you have questions, you may send your questions or your queries in the comment section.
I think there is a question here from Harvey. Can I address that?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Okay, so cliche. So cliche is a term for any idioms that have been overused. Kanang gibalik-balik na ba? So for instance, unsa man kaning nagbuto-buto ang akong kasing-kasing. That is already a cliche. You hear that countless times in the radio. Okay? Or you can also find that even in movies, especially in dialogues, right? Like for instance, how many times have you heard the term "I love you" in romantic films? That is already a cliche. Okay? Mm. So ano siya? That is anything gas-gas, balik-balik or sawa na.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, sir. So we have here another question. So what is the role of creative writing in our lives as students?
In your lives as students, particularly if you write if you're into fiction, if you're it of course it informs you in the makings of the craft. However, if you're not into those things, you it also helps you understand more about, especially when we read literature, because here in creative writing we also read as writers. And this is no I'm going to cite an experience, a personal experience, because I didn't started as a writer. I began writing poetry seriously at third year college, no? But before that, I was into bands. I was into playing computers. I cut classes and so forth. But when I got into poetry in the third year college as an AB English student, and I was so curious as to what makes because I didn't understand poetry. So in order to understand it, I wrote it. And the more I explored about the writing aspects, the more I understand, the more poetry became accessible to me. So now, other than kwan distansya pagamay, if it if you are not really into the no to literature and so forth, it also informs you, especially when you of course to become creative, especially in other ventures, no, because you will of course encounter you every once in a while when you try to apply jobs which calls for creativity, the elements of craft can also inform how you write, especially in cliches, especially in cliches. To avoid them, you always explore what is something new, and creative writing can help you do can expand your creativity, especially in the aspect of writing.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Oh, pardon me.
Sir, we have another question. So, how can we appreciate creative writing? Sir? All right. So, I guess our guest speaker is having a problem with his device. All right. So, thank you again, Sir Mark Anthony, for answering the questions of the students. At this point, let us award the certificate of appreciation to our. Yeah, let us award the certificate of appreciation to our resource speaker. Allow me to read the citation. So, Certificate of Appreciation is presented to Mark Anthony Dapusala in grateful acknowledgement of his distinguished and invaluable service rendered as a resource speaker on the topic Creative Writing, Appreciation of Fiction and Nonfiction Stories during the English Month celebration held virtually on November 24, 2021. Given this 24th of November 2021, Capital University, Cagayan de Oro City, Philippines. Signed by the English Club moderator, Gladys Jane S. Cumba, English coordinator, Romel L. Fuentes, and the Vice President for Academic Affairs, at the same time, the Senior High School Principal, Dr. Amor Q. De Torres. Once again, thank you, Sir Mark, for joining us today and for sharing your expertise with us. All right, so at this point, let us call our English Club moderator, Miss Gladys Jane Kumba, for her closing remarks. Ma'am?
So let me begin by expressing my deepest gratitude to our speaker, Mr. Ton Dapusala, for sharing his knowledge and expertise in today's webinar, and also to Mr. Marvin Pamisa for yesterday's webinar. I would also like to thank our dearest principal, Dr. Amor QD Torres, to our vice principal, Mrs. Maria Conchita P. Bass, our supportive teachers, sponsors, and to the students who took time to participate in our two-day webinar. Thank you so much. And this is just one of the highlights of our English Month celebration. There is still a lot of activities to look forward to. Namely, we have the Stormy Tongue. You're going to choose one tongue twister video to take as a challenge. We also have here the Voice It Out. The contestants are challenged to voice act the given characters from different movies. We also have the Story of the Year. You're going to produce a story with a length of 100 words only. Next, we have the Pictionary. the students the students must find out the situation or concept not depicted in the drawing or a specific situation. We also have the literary portrayal, in which the contestants are challenged to portray literary authors, orators, poets from English world. And then we also have the Choose Me and Tell Me, in which the contestants are challenged to showcase their creativity as they share and tell magical stories with lessons. And lastly, we have the Poems for a Greater Change, in which the contestants are challenged to compose a poem with a minimum of 2 stanzas. You can also contact the signed teachers in every contest, or you can just visit our official group page. It's CU-SHS English Club. So no, we encourage everyone to please join and showcase your innate talent. Don't worry, because we are still accepting your entries until November 27 at 3 p.m. So again, thank you so much and keep safe, everyone. Sir Frank? Okay, so I guess Sir Ton is here. Okay, just wait for a while. So I guess we're having some technical issues. So I hope that you have submitted your entries, no? I hope that there are a lot of students who have participated in our activities prepared just only for you. Okay, so okay, I guess okay, Sir Ton, thank you.
All right, yeah. So thank you, Ma'am Gladys. So Sir Ton Daposala is back to answer the questions of the students. So we have here the question. So is it necessary po ba to use lalum og meaning na words in creative writing po, or should we use easy words lang po para mo-understand diretso ang mga message sa passage? Yes, Sir Ton?
Kuan. Uh, kuan, pinaka kuan, if you, the most encouraging kuan, the in creative writing, we encourage students to to use the words that we use today, of course. No, I used to have students. I used to have students who wrote who wrote in a way that is existing from the time of Shakespeare, na mga thy, thou, and so forth. No, so that is already an archaic language. No, archaic meaning kuha na siya. It's already a kuha na siya, kinaraan na siya. So as much as possible, write the now. Mm. And also, the term lalum is also vague. Kay lalum can also be referred to aside from technical terms. It also used from sometimes the word lalum is used as an excuse not to learn and not to learn new words. Yan ana. So no. So in a way, it also relates to what I discussed about finding your voice. So in order to refine your voice, you have to expand your diction, or you hone your diction and expand your vocabulary. You are, after all, desire or gusto manggig ka mo writer and ana, di ba? So in other words, your medium is ultimately language. Okay? So kana.
All right, so thank you, sir. Another question. Creative writing requires the enigma of our imagination, as what you have mentioned, sir. So I would like to ask, how can we prosper our imagination to fully benefit our skills in creative writing?
Hmm. So how can we prosper, right? How can we prosper our imagination to fully benefit our ah
Yes, sir.
I I mentioned this in the first slide. You read. If you want to write well, you read. Although you have a teacher in creative writing class, I always insist, even to my because most of your teachers here used to be my students. Yes, I am that old and baby face, charot. But aside from that, koan, the best teacher when it comes to writing is always the reading. Okay, especially when you koan, be a greedy reader, be gluttonous when it comes to reading. Read as much as you can, and later you can develop your taste.
All right, so thank you, sir. So reading is really essential for you to be able to write well. So all right, so we'll cater the last question. So this is, I guess, the last question. In what way po creative writing transforms students' lives and contribute on addressing the present issues? Again, in what way po creative writing transforms students' lives and contribute on addressing the present issues?
Hmm. Now, good question. So, aside from creative writing is actually the written part when we try to study literature. And we know that in the overall canon of literature, it is it is part of our it is one aspect of our understanding, especially when we engage in the arts, no, arts as a curriculum in the academe, no, because we we tend to take things for granted that that our lives are pretty much are molded in narratives, no, and there are different kinds of narratives, no, especially now in present issues where disinformation is so prevalent and so forth. And usually literature is often the voice that echoes, especially in our society. It is the voice from which the oppressed can resonate with, no. And I remember that one of three or four of my students have managed to write engaging works to a point that they were published outside the no outside the campus. I believe one of which was in Kabistak in Dagmay. So in a way, they managed to what in their own way they managed to contribute to the grander narrative of our human existence. Now, yan na.
All right. So thank you, Sir Ton Daposala, for answering the questions of the students. Right. So thank you for joining us today and for sharing your expertise with us. So before you go, sir, do you have any final message or advice to our students or the young writers? Yes, sir.
Gone. The thing that I guess I missed there is the the actual writing is when you write na bitaw, when you write your first draft, yung nana, that's not the actual writing. The real writing is in the revision. Right, Ma'am Gladys? Right, Sir Sir Ricard? I'm sorry that I made your lives very hard. But yes, the revision, write, read, and write. For me personally, I revised 90 times in just one poem. So never stop reading, never stop writing.
All right. So thank you once again, Sir Ton Daposala. So never stop writing and never stop reading, students. All right. So at this point, all right, so Mom Gladys already delivered her closing remarks. So students, this is just one of the many activities prepared for you in celebration of the English month. So we encourage everyone to participate on the contests and activities, right? So entries for the different activities will be accepted until November 27 until 3 p.m. So thank you for participating and thank you for joining us this afternoon. We hope that you learned something significant today. And that wraps up our webinar today. So see you on December 1 for the culminating activity. This has been Frank Bernie Argyle signing off. For your attendance will be provided in the comment section.